The first thing I noticed that Monday morning wasn't a cold draft from the faulty air vent above my desk. It wasn't the faint hum of the copier down the hall, or the stale smell of burnt coffee drifting from a break room. It was absence, a small but jarring gap in the landscape of my office cubicle, the missing silhouette of my chair. It wasn't just any chair. It was the one I had molded myself into during endless nights of number crunching and last-minute deadlines. The one that carried me through the quarterly reports that no one else had the patience or skill to compile. The one that absorbed my frustrations as I hunched over spreadsheets. The cushion gradually giving way, but still reliable, still mine. That chair had been with me longer than my current boss. It had weathered reorganizations, layoffs, budget tightening. Yet there it wasn't. In its place stood a plastic-backed monstrosity, the kind you'd find lined up in a waiting room or shoved into a conference hall when extra seating was needed. Its legs were slightly uneven. I could tell by the way it tilted even as it stood still, like it was already apologizing for existing. I stared at it, confused, almost laughing in disbelief. When I turned, my boss was leaning against the divider in my cubicle, arms folded, mouth curled into that infuriating half-smile. "Budget adjustments," he said casually, as though that explained everything. "Budget adjustments?" I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. "You mean, out of everything in this office, the first thing to go was my chair?" "Not just yours," he said, shrugging. "We're trying to standardize. Uniform seating, cost-effective purchases. It's about fairness." Fairness? That word caught in my chest like a splinter. Fairness in a workplace where I routinely stayed 3 hours later than anyone else. Fairness in a department where my reports kept entire projects afloat. Fairness, apparently, was measured in back pain and lost productivity. I sat down slowly, lowering myself into the replacement chair. The seat was stiff, the backrest barely reached halfway up my spine, and the plastic arms cut into my elbows. Within seconds, I knew this wasn't going to work. Not for hours, not for weeks. But I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me wince. My boss lingered a moment longer, clearly hoping for a reaction, before walking away with that smug confidence of someone who thought they had the upper hand. Inside, fury was bubbling. I wanted to shout, to drag the ridiculous chair into his office and demand my old one back. But I stopped myself. Anger in the open was messy, unproductive. Anger, when bottled carefully, could be transformed into something much sharper. Strategy. I opened my laptop, fingers trembling not from fear, but from resolve. I created a new folder. Inside it, I began compiling. Every report I delivered on time. Every client email praising my clarity, precision, and professionalism. Every note of acknowledgement, however brief, from upper management. If they wanted to treat me like I was expendable, I would remind them with evidence that I was anything but. The chair creaked beneath me as though mocking my efforts. My back throbbed after only an hour, the discomfort digging into my concentration. Yet I kept typing, scrolling through archives, documenting every measurable victory. The more I gathered, the clearer my plan became. This wasn't just about a chair. It was about respect, about how easily comfort and dignity could be stripped away under the guise of fairness. They thought I would adapt, that I'd keep churning out flawless reports while silently suffering. They assumed that I was too professional, too afraid to push back. But they underestimated the quiet power of the person who held the keys to the numbers, the person who knew where every figure lived, how every dataset connected, the person whose reports were the invisible scaffolding of the entire department. That night, as I packed my bag and stretched my aching back, I made a silent vow. If they wanted to test how much I could endure, I would show them. But I wouldn't shout, I wouldn't beg. I would wield the one thing they couldn't afford to lose, the flow of information itself. As the office lights flickered above me and I walked past rows of empty cubicles, I glanced back at the plastic chair sitting stubbornly at my desk. They thought they had won a small victory. They didn't realize they had sparked a war. And I don't lose wars. By Wednesday, the chair had ceased being an inconvenience. It had become a weapon. Not mine, not yet. Theirs. Every squeak of its uneven leg as I shifted at my desk was a reminder. We control your comfort. Every ache in my shoulders whispered, be grateful you still have a desk at all. But discomfort, I realize, cuts both ways. It gnaws at the body, yes, but it also sharpens the mind. With every twinge of pain, I was reminded that this was more than furniture. It was an experiment, one I hadn't agreed to but was determined to finish on my terms. On Tuesday, I had tested my tolerance. 8 hours perched on plastic, spine grinding against a half backrest. By the end of the day, I couldn't turn my head without wincing. I pictured my boss at home, reclining in a leather executive chair, laughing to thought of me hunched like a marionette whose strings were pulled too tight. So I adapted, not to the chair, but to the game. I stopped leaving my reports neatly packaged in their inbox by noon, the way I usually did. Instead, I let them simmer, unfinished but not forgotten. When colleagues popped by asking for updates, I smiled, nodded, gave vague assurances. When meetings rolled around and eyes darted toward me, expecting handouts, I shrugged lightly, still working on it. The truth? The reports were done. I had them, polished and precise, sitting in a hidden folder on my computer. But I wasn't delivering them. Not yet. It began small. On Wednesday morning, the quarterly expense forecast was due at 9 a.m. sharp. For years, I've been the dependable clockwork of the department. Always early, always precise. That morning, I leaned back, as much as the awful chair allowed, and sipped my lukewarm coffee while the minutes ticked by. 9:05, 9:15. By 9:30, my boss was pacing the corridor, peeking into my cubicle with forced nonchalance. "Forecast ready?" he asked, his voice deliberately casual. I tapped my screen as though lost in a sea of numbers. Almost. Just a few loose ends to tie up. His jaw tightened. He left without another word. Inside, I smiled. I wasn't sabotaging. Not yet. I was teaching them what it felt like to wait, to depend on something beyond their control. By noon, the entire team was restless. Meetings stalled. Plans paused. At 1 p.m., I dropped the report into the shared drive as though it had always been there. My boss retrieved it immediately, muttering something about good work, but refusing to look me in the eye. That was the first spark. By Thursday, I escalated. The sales projections were critical for a client pitch, the kind of document my boss built his reputation on. Without it, the pitch was blind. I worked silently that morning, aware of the growing tension in the air. The office was dimmed as colleagues exchanged glances, whispering about my unusual delay. My boss pretended calm, but his knuckles whitened on the edge of his desk. When he finally asked, voice tight, "Do you have the projections?" I looked up slowly, feigning surprise. "Oh," I said lightly, "they're in draft. Accuracy takes time." He blinked. I could see it. The calculation behind his eyes, the sudden realization of dependency. He couldn't storm, couldn't scold me publicly. Everyone in the department knew the truth. I was the one who built the bones of their success. Without me, numbers were meaningless noise. By 3 p.m., the whispers had turned into unease. The client call was at 4. At 3:45, I finally uploaded projections, neatly formatted, flawlessly accurate. My boss snatched them up, storming into the conference room, without acknowledgement. But I had seen it. The flash of panic before relief, the tiniest tremor in his voice when he asked. That tremor was leverage. That evening, as I packed up, my back stiff and aching, I imagined the reports in my hands not as work, but as currency. My chair had been a comfort they thought I didn't need. My reports? Those were comfort they couldn't live without. Friday sealed it. The weekly analysis, the holy grail of the department, the one thing executives demanded with religious devotion, was due. I began the day in silence, fingers tapping keys, face unreadable. My boss hovered like a storm cloud, circling but never striking. He tried jokes. He tried small talk. By noon, he dropped the facade. "Where are we with the analysis?" His tone was clipped, stripped of pretense. I turned slowly in the chair, letting it creak under the shift of my weight. The sound cut the air like a blade. Still refining, I said, eyes steady, Comfort affects concentration. You'd be amazed how much a chair can change output. His mouth opened, then closed. He knew what I was doing. He also knew he couldn't stop it. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, then returned to my screen. The power dynamic had shifted, subtly, invisibly, but undeniably. At 4:59, with the entire department holding its breath, I uploaded the analysis. Perfect, on time, but only just enough to remind them that I held the strings now. That night, walking out into the fading light of the city, my body ached with pain, but my spirit surged with energy. They thought they could break me by taking away a chair. All they'd done was hand me the tools to build leverage. Every number I typed from that point forward was not just data. It was a reminder that without me, their polished reports, their perfect pitches, their entire facade of competence would collapse. The chair was their play. The reports were mine. And I was only just beginning to disappear them. Friday night bled into the weekend with an ache in my back that refused to loosen. Every time I stood, my spine cracked like old timber. Yet there was something else, something sharper than the pain, humming inside me. Power. I had felt it Friday at 4:59, as I uploaded the analysis of breath before the clock struck 5. The collective sigh of relief from the department, the clipped gratitude in my boss's voice as he grabbed the file, without daring complain about its timing. That sound had been confirmation. They weren't in control anymore. I was. But power is fragile when it lives only in silence. If I was going to win this game, it couldn't just be about small delays and hidden files. At some point, there had to be a moment, a break in the facade, a collision between what they thought they controlled and the reality of who actually pulled the strings. That moment came Monday. The office was unusually tense, as though everyone sensed something unspoken hovering in the air. My colleagues glanced at me curiously as I arrived, their faces betraying a quiet awareness that my absence, even for a single day, could bring everything grinding to a halt. Some smiled with solidarity. Others looked away quickly, afraid to be caught on the wrong side of a storm. I sat in a hated chair, adjusting my posture as if preparing for battle. My boss was already circling, pretending to check in on the team, but really keeping me in his line of sight. His confidence was chipped, his smirk dulled. At 10 o'clock sharp, he called me into his office. "Close the door," he said. His tone wasn't commanding. It was tight, forced. I stepped inside, shutting the glass door behind me. The blinds were half drawn, casting stripes of light across the desk, stacked with papers he hadn't bothered to read. He gestured stiffly toward the chair across from him. "Sit." I stayed standing. "I'd rather not," I replied, my voice calm. "I've had enough of bad chairs lately." His eyes narrowed. "You've been playing games with deadlines." I tilted my head. "Games? Or adjustments?" "This isn't how we work," he snapped, his hand slapping against the desk. "We depend on you to deliver on time. You're holding the entire department hostage." I let the silence hang, just long enough for him to feel it press against his chest. Then I stepped forward and placed a single sheet of paper on his desk. It wasn't a report. It was a list. Hours logged. Reports delivered. Client praise. Executive commendations. All mine. All dated and undeniable. "You depend on me," I said softly, "and I deliver. Always. But let's not pretend this is about deadlines. This is about respect. You took away the one tool that made it possible for me to keep performing at my best, and you called it fairness. That wasn't fairness. That was control." His jaw tightened, but I saw it, the flicker in his eyes. Recognition. Not guilt. Not yet, but recognition. "You think a chair makes you indispensable?" he tried. "No," I said, leaning closer, lowering my voice until it was barely above a whisper. "My work makes me indispensable. The chair just makes it sustainable. And now you've learned how fragile your timelines are without me." His face flushed. He wasn't used to this. He was used to compliance, to employees nodding along while grinding themselves into dust for his approval. This was new. This was resistance laced with precision. "You're out of line," he hissed. "Am I?" I asked, sliding the sheet of accomplishments closer to him. Or are you just realizing the line was never where you thought it was? For a long moment, we stared at each other across the desk. He wanted to lash out to reassert dominance, but he couldn't, not when reality was staring at him in black ink. Proof that I carried this department on my back long before he decided to pull my chair out from under me. Finally, he leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "What do you want?" I didn't smile. Smiling would have made it seem like a victory lap, and this wasn't over yet. I want what I had before, the tools to do my job without sabotage, and I want acknowledgement, not for me as a person you like or dislike, for the value I bring. That's it. He said nothing. His fingers drummed against the desk, restless, calculating. Until then, I continued. The reports will remain unpredictable. I turned and walked toward the door, leaving him in silence. My heart pounded against my ribs, adrenaline sparking in my veins. For a moment, I almost faltered, almost questioned whether I had pushed too far. But then I stepped back into the office floor, felt the weight of my colleagues' eyes, and realized something. The power had already shifted. By Tuesday, the cracks began to show. Meetings without my input dissolved into chaos. Executives sent frustrated emails demanding clarity on data that hadn't yet appeared. My boss stalked around the office like a caged animal, snapping at anyone within reach, but his eyes always drifted back to me. I kept my expression neutral, my actions precise. I still worked, always worked, but I dictated the rhythm now. Reports appeared when I chose, not when commanded. Data flowed like a river, with its source controlled by one gate. Wednesday brought the breaking point. A high-stakes meeting with senior leadership loomed, and my boss needed performance metrics that only I could produce. At 9 a.m., he approached my desk, trying to sound casual. "Metrics ready?" I clicked my mouse, pretending to scroll, still refining. His composure snapped. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper. "You're putting me in a corner." I looked up, meeting his glare without flinching. "Now you know how it feels." The silence between us was electric. For the first time, he looked away first. That afternoon, I let the report sit until 10 minutes before the meeting. When I finally handed them over, his hands shook as he grabbed them, not from anger, from fear. He knew, now, that I could pull the floor out from under him any time I chose. That night, as I sat home nursing the ache in my spine, I replayed the moment in his office. His demand, my refusal, his silence. It wasn't about the chair anymore. It was about leverage. They had stripped me of comfort, thinking it would weaken me. Instead, they had forced me to recognize the one truth they never wanted me to see. The power was always mine. And for the first time, they knew it too. The weekend arrived, but my mind didn't rest. Even as I tried to lose myself in mundane distractions, groceries, laundry, a film I'd seen 3 times already, the memory of my boss's face haunted me. That flicker of realization, the admission unspoken but undeniable. He had no control without me. Monday came with the weight of that knowledge pressing on the air like a storm before rain. I entered the office earlier than most, because I wanted the silence. I wanted the moment to myself before the whispers began again, before eyes followed me from cubicle to cubicle like I was carrying contraband. And there it was, my chair, not the plastic back joke that had bruised my ribs and shredded my focus, not the stiff monstrosity meant to humble me. My chair, my old, familiar seat, rolled neatly back under my desk as if it had never left, polished, adjusted, waiting. I stopped in the doorway, staring at it. For a second, I thought I was imagining things. Then I reached down and pressed the cushion. The give, the comfort, the subtle squeak in the lever. It was real. Someone had returned it. But not just returned. Cleaned, restored, almost reverent in its placement. No note, no words. Just a chair, like a silent admission that the experiment had failed. I lowered myself into it slowly, savoring familiarity, the way my back sank into support that was earned, not granted. Relief washed through me, uncoiling knots that had tightened over 2 punishing weeks. But it wasn't just relief. It was victory. Around me, colleagues noticed. Some smiled quietly, nodding as though acknowledging the unspoken. Others raised eyebrows, whispering. But nobody dared comment out loud. They didn't need to. The story was written in the absence of that plastic imposter. The story was in my chair, back where it belonged. By mid-morning, my boss appeared. He lingered by my cubicle, arms folded, but this time the smirk was gone. His expression was careful, measured. "Comfortable?" he asked, tone flat. I looked up, holding his gaze. "Much better." He nodded once, curtly, and walked away without another word. But I had seen it. Respect. Begrudging, perhaps reluctant, but respect nonetheless. The week unfolded differently after that. Reports flowed on time, not withheld or delayed, but under my rhythm, my choice. Meetings ran smoothly again. Executives received their numbers without panic, and the department returned to a semblance of order. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inwardly, everything had, because now he knew. And more importantly, so did I. It wasn't about the chair anymore. It never really had been. The chair was the spark, the insult that revealed a deeper truth. I wasn't disposable. I wasn't interchangeable. I was the axis on which the entire machine turned. They had tried to strip me of dignity, to reduce me to compliance, and instead they had reminded me of the leverage I carried in every keystroke. Still, victory brings responsibility. I could have gloated, could have lorded it over my boss, dragging out his humiliation, but power flaunted recklessly burns out quickly. True strength is quieter, steadier, more enduring. So I let the report speak for me. I let the numbers tell the story. Flawless, precise, indispensable. I didn't mention the chair again. I didn't have to. Every time he walked past my desk, every time he saw me leaning back comfortably while delivering results that kept his own position intact, the message was clear. Respect isn't optional. Weeks passed. The department adjusted to its new rhythm. My boss became more careful with his words, more measured in his requests. He never admitted it outright, but I noticed a shift. No more casual jabs. No more power games disguised as fairness. The smugness had been replaced by something more useful, caution, and the whispers from my colleagues grew louder, bolder. People stopped me in the break room, thanked me indirectly for what I had done. Some said they had noticed the missing reports, the delayed files, the subtle changes. They had realized, even if they hadn't said it, that I had drawn a line none of them dared to. "You proved something," one colleague murmured, glancing around to make sure no one else heard. "I just wanted my chair back," I said, smiling faintly. But I knew it was more than that, because it wasn't just my chair that returned. It was my dignity, my authority, my ownership of the value I brought to that building every single day. And as I leaned back one afternoon, spinning slowly in my reclaimed seat, I thought about the lesson etched into every squeak of the lever. They can strip away comfort. They can test your limits. But they cannot erase the worth you bring. Not unless you let them. That day, I didn't just win a chair. I won the silent war of respect. And in offices everywhere, respect is the only currency that truly matters.